Good evening and welcome to the Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rasool. Tonight we are speaking about hair. Now I've had this show on my radar for a long time, but a few weeks ago, the Clicks brand displayed this advertisement on their website depicting non-black hair as dry and brittle. And the women of South Africa responded. They accused the store of discriminating against black women and discriminating against black hair. It was later found that it was actually Tresemme who created the ad and Clicks who published it. Both brands removed the ad from their websites and published an apology, but this was not enough. We wanted to know why brands were still pushing straight hair as the norm. Tonight we're going to be speaking about hair, identity, politics, and advertising. But before that, let's hear from some of you about how the advertisement affected you.
My opinion about the Click saga is that they were right to be reprimanded and to be shut down, because only then would they know that what they did was wrong. And it would also be good if the management would be changed completely, because they do have the means to change them. Also, they also influence what gets published and what does not. So for them to allow such discriminating posts and adverts to go out to the people means they didn't see anything wrong about that. So we need to completely change the management. We need to put black people in there, a lot of black people, because they are being discriminated a lot. This racism is going a lot. It's going hard and a lot, because Clicks has a large variety of followers and already has a large audience. So if they publish a lot of discriminating posts, racist comments, then it means it reaches a massive audience. So if they change the management, then that would work.
In my opinion, that Tresemme advert was blatantly racist. Straight to the point. You can't tell me that the entire advertising team from Tresemme, Unilever, and Clicks did not see that ad was racist and offensive. Also, I like the way the EFF responded to the matter, because racism is barbaric and chaotic and violent. So the only language racists understand is barbarism and violence. So also, people can't tell black people how to respond or how to react to racism. It was just unacceptable.
I'm just gonna give you my opinion on the whole Clicks issue about women's hair in comparison to the white man's hair, saying that it's healthy and all that, and that of a black woman, it's bad. So what I think on that is really people should not have taken that as much of an issue, because these are just opinions. If you know that your hair is good, it's good. If you know that it's bad, it's bad. I mean, we also have white women who have bad hair, and we also have black women with good hair. And I think it was just a misunderstanding. That's my opinion. I mean, that's my opinion.
Hi, about the Clicks and the Clicks Tresemme saga thing, where it's Clicks versus the people. My opinion is basically before the whole thing blew up, and when I saw the advert, I didn't think it was a race issue, because that's exactly how my hair looks when it's dry and damaged. That's why I chopped it all off in the first place. But I do think that the wording and the pictures used was a little bit offensive, and the fact that they apologized is what they should have done, yes, but it doesn't mean that they're off the hook. Justice still needs to be done, and a few things still needs to be in place and changed, because if we don't change it now, don't change and discuss the race issue now, we're going to live with this forever.
One, they should really take accountability. I know that initially it's an ad agency that initially drew up the the mop-up plans for the campaign. But at the end of the day, someone has to approve that. Someone has to give that a go-ahead. So I'm saying, as a company that saw that ad fit to align it with your brand, whether it's willingly knowing at the end of the day, majority of your clientele base, you gave it a go-ahead. What that alerts me is you see nothing wrong with it. More than anything, you absolutely believe in the message that it's spreading. You know what I mean? However it's received, whether it's received bad or good, what that alerts me is you are putting a stamp of advocate to this whole message and ad. So initially, I think they should take accountability, man. They should really take accountability. Having looked at their structure, more than anything, do more in terms of putting people like hell in positions of power enough so that you don't make the same mistake again. Because if we honestly speaking, look at the majority of their clientele base, it is black South Africans. So to even really stamp an ad of that taste, for me, speaks a lot about the fact that management is out of touch. You know, it's that they're out of touch with the reality. They're out of touch with their identity in terms of how it's received as a company. So absolutely, something definitely should be done about it. And firing an ad agency that designed that is not enough. In fact, that's just shifting blame, because at the end of the day, they are the ones that gave it a go ahead. You gave it a sign. You gave it a sign of approval. You gave it a green. So something has to be done. Some transformation within its leadership, first and foremost, that would stop anything of that liking to happen again. And I think more than anything, they really have to look at themselves proper. Do a proper introspection in terms of their company, their clientele base, who they're really speaking to. That would inform every decision they make. I think, them just blaming an ad company is not enough. They need to take accountability. That would be the first step of working towards change. Then we want to see actual transformation within the company. But yeah, that's my take.
Well, my take on like the whole clicks thing, I feel like it's wrong, honestly, first of all. And I feel like all hair should be celebrated, bro, like, point blank period. And that there should never be like any form of like discrimination, like when it comes to that, or anything for that matter. I feel like black people like need to be respected. And the fact that like you have people like going on like protests, I mean, granted, like I feel like they have all the right to do so, and hopefully like there'll be some sort of action, like with regards to the management team of clicks, and like the right action will be taken.
Good evening, you're still watching The Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rasool, and tonight we're speaking about hair, identity, politics, and advertising. Now, a few weeks ago, Clicks and Tresemme released an advertisement showing non-straight hair as dry and brittle, and the backlash was insane but also amazing. Since then, numerous stores, not just Clicks, but Checkers and ShopRite, and I think others, have removed the Tresemme brand from their shelves. Tonight we're going to be speaking to Simone Briessies Thomas, who is the founder of KroesRocks, a business that embraces loving our natural hair. She's also the co-founder of the Cape Town Naturally Festival. Simone, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Lenina. Thank you very much for having me.
So Simone, tonight we're talking about hair, we're talking about natural hair, not so natural hair, the debacle with Clicks and Tresemme. And so you transitioned sort of from what we would call, I guess, I don't like to say non-natural, but treating the hair quite often, to embracing the full natural look about a decade ago. And so I wanted to ask about that experience, sort of what was the process before and what drove that, and then also, how it's been, what the transition has been like.
Yeah, so I think that, you know what, growing up on the Cape Flats, I think everybody's journey or natural hair journey is quite similar. And the moment we start talking about it, everyone in the circle, especially if you grew up on the Cape Flats, you can relate to what the other person is saying, and immediately there's a connection and there is a common denominator, and that is, of course, our hair. So, like I think most girls that grew up on the Cape Flats, that every 3 months my hair used to be relaxed. Some girls, I believe, they relaxed often. They would relax like once a month, but my mom started relaxing my hair. I think I was about age 11. And so obviously when I grew up, I was able to do a lot of things myself. And doing my hair was obviously one of those things that I was able to do myself. So every weekend it was, your traditional wash, blow dry, flat iron, and that soil coast, because you can't show off the do because it has to be kept in as long as possible, especially also for special occasions. So that was like Christmas and Mother's Day and all of, your church anniversaries and church concerts and school concerts. So my hair had to be relaxed. And of course, with the GHD or flat iron introduction into the market, I used to flat iron that as well. And I remember with my first job, that was one of the most sentimental purchases because I saved up for quite a number of months. And I purchased myself a GHD because it was just so that precious to me. Because obviously your hair had to be straightened, and if it wasn't straight, it wasn't beautiful, or you couldn't really go anywhere. Like we know Christmas, like your hair had to be, flat ironed, it had to be straight and dude, and done. And so that was part of my journey prior to transitioning to natural. I've always been drawn to ladies with natural hair. I've always been drawn to it, to them, and I always used to be in so much awe because, oh my gosh, I couldn't, like, I loved it and I loved how it looked and how free it was. But then for me, it was just like, oh, my hair can't do that. Like, I want my hair to do what your hair does, but I was just too afraid that my hair would, not do, the big curls. And I transitioned in 2011. And I just, transitioning is basically where you just stop chemically treating your hair. And at the time, there wasn't as much information or noise in the media about natural hair and not chemically treating your hair. And so I was transitioning for up to 6 months, and I was just doing what I now know is twist. I just used to call it two-strand plaits, but now I understand that it is actually twist. And I think my hair was at its strongest, and it was so soft and it was so full, but I just didn't know what to do with it. And I was so afraid of cutting my hair at that point in time. Even just a trim would be like absolutely, scary. It would be a very scary, very intimidating process. And so I had what is known as my rebirth of my natural hair. And then at the end, because obviously my hair was now transitioning and growing out from the root, the natural hair, for 6 months. So it's basically half of most of the hair was now, unprocessed, raw, natural virgin hair. And then the ends were more straight. So now I was sitting with two different strands of hair on my head. And it obviously made looking after it and caring for it very, very frustrating, very difficult. And because I was also so intimidated by, cutting my hair. And so after about 6 or 7 months, I went back to relaxers because I just did not know how to look after my hair. There wasn't a lot of resources, like I said. Like nowadays, we have influencers. We've got these natural hair bloggers, which is awesome sources of information. And then I went back to relaxing my hair.
And so that is very interesting, I have to say. And we do relapse, if you want to call it that, because it's very difficult. And I also saved up for my GHD. I have to say, I thought it was the most magnificent product that had ever been created. just to speak about sort of the experiences from sort of society, and when I say that, I mean in our communities, in our families. I personally grew up with very bushy hair because I wasn't able to, no one in my household was able to blow dry my very thick strand. So I just had to sort of live with it and grew up. Um, often in the shops people say, "Hey, Tina Turner," and it wasn't meant as a compliment back then.
Yeah.
So what were your sort of, I think, the reactions from family and so forth when you decided to start growing your hair out? And from your mother, because it's obviously a very different look and just everything than what you had grown up with, and what was the accepted norm? You were deviating from the norm essentially.
Yeah, so my mom is. I always say this, and I always tell her, you know what, and I tell people it's that I owe a lot to my mom. My mom bestowed or instilled very good principles in my life and as a woman as well, because I've always had a very good self-esteem, and it's because of my mother, because of the way that she raised us as a single mother. And I've never had a low self-esteem or where I wasn't as confident. And so I owe that to her. It's the way that she disciplined me and how she helped me navigate through life. So my mom has always been all about the curls. And I think she also just succumbed to society norms, or societal norms. And I think she also succumbed to, it's easier to do the relaxer. And I think I'm at this point where I'm like, it's not her fault. She didn't know better. But I think she always made my hair curls, and so I was part of pageants and modeling shows and all of that things, and she always made my hair curls, like, but it was those in the orange roller, and then it must
Yes.
go into the green roller, and then it must be done like that. So that was normal, but obviously for all other days it had to be straightened.
Yes.
And so we were a house full of women. So everybody was doing everybody's hair. And so by the time you were 13, you had to do your younger cousin's hair, and your younger cousin had to do the other younger cousin's hair. So it was this ripple effect, and that's how we kind of did each other's hair. So it was always like, no, can you like just do something about this? And so we were very much aware of these things and always looking out for, okay, what is the best product, most affordable product, obviously to look after our hair. But I think I was much older, or I was married, yeah. So I was about 25, 26 when I did the big chop. And so at that time I was married, I was living in my parental home. And so I came home and I went to visit my mom and my grandmother, and I had a big chop, and they were like, "Where's your hair? What happened?" What? So they were quite confused. They were just like, "Okay, okay." So they're like, so like, you must now just blow dry it. And I said, no, I'm not blow drying it. Oh, but aren't you just going to, you know, I'm not sure. They were very confused and hesitant. They didn't really know how to react. But I had received some horrible remarks from family members as well. And for me, I realized, I think after the third, bad remark or bad comment, I had realized, but this is not about you.
Yeah.
This is about me. This is about my journey of self acceptance. It's about my journey of accepting my hair. And I wanted my natural hair. And then I questioned them and I said, but who says our hair needed to be relaxed? And why did you even relax our hair? And how did you allow for my hair to be relaxed? So I think that's where I realized, after that third bad comment like rolled off me like water over a duck's back, then I realized this thing is so personal, and no matter what anybody else says, um, it is not about them. It is about my journey and my process, and I don't even need to answer to them. Somebody also on a social media page, somebody at the time then posted that, oh, the big chop isn't for everybody, and I said, Oh, okay.
Simone,
That's your opinion.
I'm just going to come in there because you're saying very interesting things. And we're speaking about sort of how your mother, and I think my mother as well, and really just everybody that I knew and grew up with, had sort of succumbed to what, let's call it straight hair, you know, what we think we should look like, what this norm was presented to us, and made a part of our identity. So, for instance, in my household, where people wouldn't really be very outright about it, the dissonance that I would notice is that when my hair was blow dried, I would get so many compliments. Or my mom would say, now this is how you must look every day, you know? So there would be sort of that endorsement of the straight hair, also out in the street. That sameness would get a lot of compliments. I wanted to ask about, you know, your sense of identity and whether when you speak about the transitioning process and you speak about going to the natural hair and what people's responses were, how did you feel? I mean, was there a shift in identity? Was there a realization that, you know, as you're speaking about when you responded to those comments, was there a realization that their comments also was not about you? It was sort of like, you know, there's this big conspiracy for all of us to look the same way and to look straight and to look like what we see on TV, I guess.
Yeah. So for me, it was, I think that, you know, I always say this is that, like I told you in the beginning, is that my mom reared me in such a way that I never lacked self-confidence. I was I still have a very good self-esteem. But the moment once I returned natural, it was like that confidence went up into a different dimension immediately. Like, if you thought that I was outspoken, I was even more outspoken. If you thought that I was confident and well presented, I'm even more confident, more well presented. So I think that was to answer your question, that was it was just that I could went to a different dimension. That's all I can, negate to that. And that's all that I could add in terms of, oh, okay, because then I realized, but I'm comfortable with my natural hair. I'm comfortable with rocking my natural hair.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of ladies also that I speak to on a regular basis is that I'm not comfortable. They're not comfortable going outside of their home just yet. And so for me, I'm comfortable with that. And for me, it was like, I don't need to change anything to fit in. I don't need to change anything about myself, the way I speak, my appearance, my hair and the texture of my hair and the appearance of the texture of my hair. I don't need to change that. What is broken and what needs to change is society's view on my hair and what beauty is. And unfortunately, we've been raised and taught and infiltrated, and messages that have constantly been stated and put out there is that the straighter the hair, the better. The straighter the hair, the more beautiful you are. The longer the hair, the more beauty you possess. And that is constantly changing. Like, I'm not even afraid of the scissor anymore. Like, okay, if you're going to chop my hair, chop off my hair. If I need to trim it, I need to trim it. Because for me, it's all about the health of my hair.
Yeah. That's wonderful, Simone. It's as if almost embracing your natural hair becomes a catalyst for embracing your whole self. Simone, that's all we have time for right now. Thank you so much for joining us. I think there's a lot of women who are going to resonate with that journey. So thank you for sharing.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.
Welcome back. You're still watching The Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rasool, and tonight we are speaking about hair, identity, politics, and advertising. Now, joining us now is Merle Grace O'Brien. She's a futurist and a founder of Creation iLab, the African Innovation Institute for the Future, and she's also a fellow and former president of the Public Relations Institute of South Africa. Merle is going to be chatting to us about the response from Clicks and Tresemme and looking at the backlash by society, by women across South Africa who accuse the brand of discrimination and for positioning white and straight hair as normal. Merle, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Lenina.
So Merle, tonight we're speaking about hair, identity, politics, and advertising, which is advertising, marketing, and PR. That's your space. I wanted to start with asking your thoughts from a PR and marketing perspective on the faux pas by Clicks and Tresemme. What were your feelings and thoughts around that?
Thanks, Lenina. I think it's a really pertinent time for us to be having these conversations. So first and foremost, it's really a pity that racism in this country is still not a punishable offense. That was sort of like my first thought around it, because more than 20 years ago, we sat down as an industry to draft a Black Economic Empowerment Transformation Charter for the sector. It was a really clumsy process back in the day. But I think that those who didn't get it back then are certainly showing themselves up in the wash right now, because something like that would have passed through at least 5 very senior people if this was a proper professional advertising and marketing setup. And for Unilever and for a company like Clicks, really to be trying to wash this down is unacceptable.
So Merle, it's very interesting you say that and you speak to accountability, because the next thing I wanted to ask you was about Clicks and Tresemme's response. And if I recall correctly, they removed the offending ad and they just put up a very short apology saying, we're sorry. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, it is something that we are taking up with them. My thoughts around that obviously is that it was lame. When you do a crisis management response, the two things you have to absolutely take into account up front is, number one, what is the seriousness of this? And what we saw happening there was Clicks, Tresemme, Unilever underestimated the seriousness of women's hair issues and the depth to which that cuts. And so within this context of South Africa, it really was not something to be taken lightly, but that's really what they did. The second thing that one has to take into account when dealing with the crisis is then the probability that this will reoccur. So whilst we saw that Clicks and Tresemme and Unilever, they kind of underestimated how serious this was, they then also overestimated their capability, so to speak, to ensure that this doesn't happen again. Because that really takes a whole ecosystem of players. And there's also policy levers that one can draw upon in cases like this to ensure that it doesn't happen again. In fact, it was already, I think it was the Sunday when I was advising and kind of just saying, can you get that product off from the shelf? Because this is not going to end in a good way. And actually only by Friday did the product come off. So they lost quite a bit of time there just by making the wrong call at the moment. So yes, I certainly want to see far more done from the Public Relations Institute of South Africa together with the marketing and advertising associations. We certainly are looking more at this. We've been running a series of talks really to get people onto the same page, because when the person who is in charge is in fact, whether that be at Tresemme, at Unilever, at Clicks, if the leader is standing at the top, has no problem, or the brand manager or the agency manager has no problem with work like that going out, then we actually as an industry have an even bigger leadership problem. So I think that, a lot more questioning around the standards and about the professionalism, but more importantly, this concept of consciousness as creatives. How conscious is this creative and marketing and advertising industry of the cultural aesthetics of African people, or is this just a cut and paste that comes across to us from Europe. So, that was, my thoughts at the time that it happened. It remains my concerns now. And one's got to be asking for products like Tresemme. What kind of brand citizen are you in this country? To get away with notions like that, we certainly want to believe you must either be reprogrammed or reformed, or otherwise, maybe you shouldn't be on our shelves. Maybe we just can't be friends. So let's see how they're going to turn the situation around ahead.
No, I mean, you raise very, very interesting points. And I mean, some of the responses from people, especially as days have gone by, and I'm speaking about the public and public figures, have been, well, it's just an ad, and then the usual get over it. But what you're saying essentially is that it's not just an ad. What it is a deeper conversation about leadership, as in who is in leadership, about diversity, about creativity, and I think also about what is positioned as a norm, because nobody picked that up. So,
yes.
Do you think we need greater diversity within? Within these sectors.
This is what we were saying, is that it seems, I mean, if you look at some of the advertising agencies and you look at their scorecard numbers and the transformation that's taken place in terms of, Black leadership on the board and in the share equity and in the person who's the account director, the campaign managers and so on, we are seeing the transformation there. And that is why we have to question and say, well, if that has happened, is this perhaps an ideological? Is this about, ethics is a very interesting thing. It's a very interesting philosophy to that, because just because you can get away with doing something doesn't make it right. And that's where ethics comes into play. You've got scientists around the world at the moment, just because they can push the bar and do CRISPR or, this kind of bio warfare through nanobots, for example. And just because they can do it doesn't make it right. And who actually is going to stop them? So one of the things we had was an ethics protocol that I actually signed during my term of office in 2005 with what's called the Global Alliance of Public Relations, that is all over the world, about 200 countries that are signatory to an agreement that says we will work together. So now we've got a situation where in the South African context, we see that people are kind of just running away with their own ideas around what is permissible or in their mind okay to get away with. And I think that's why we're calling, even as an industry, for a real look then as how do we deal with this? Certainly they can be called before the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on communication. We can ask for retraining. We can ask for the team that was involved in that to appear before a disciplinary hearing. There's a lot of conversations going on at the moment, and I certainly don't see it being left here.
So, Merle, I also wanted to ask, given that inappropriate, and I think we can say it, so given that very inappropriate response and apology, do you think that there is a disconnect between sort of corporates or the heads of these companies and their customers, and in what ways should we be concerned about this? I know as a mother, and I'm just speaking as a mother, I've got I've had my issues, I've battled my demons into I'm never going to look like a white female with long straight hair that I've grown up seeing on TV, and I worry about my daughter that she might adopt sort of those same attitudes. So what are things that we as citizens, as women, should be looking more deeply into in terms of this disconnect?
One of the things that's a huge shift that we're needing to make is to become quite, if I want to say, needs focused, and especially in this time that we're going sort of, looking at economic recovery issues around COVID. What we see a lot in products historically that's been in the market is that these products were not designed for us. These products that Unilever as putting on the shelves at Clicks was actually designed for a different hair type, a different persona, a woman with different needs. She had a different lifestyle. She travels at different times. She has different family structures. Um, Now, and lives in different climates with very different hair and identity and aesthetics. A lot of these products then, literally, as we can say, during our time then as a developing market, we've been very grateful and appreciative, almost in that sense, to get what we then saw as sort of like first world products. And if it wasn't for the Unilevers, we wouldn't be getting, some of these sort of global brands. I think what we're seeing now is a whole host of locally grown botanical products with nourishing oils. I spoke about the other day, I said if I was the copywriter, I'd have gone to town about what women need, because our hairs can be quite thirsty and needs nourishment and it needs oils and it needs. So they could have really focused on what do we need and how could their product help to address that? Not telling me. So if you read the copy in the ad, the copy is showing me Unilever knows what's best for me. It knows my hair. Is my hair like this or is my hair like that? No, I don't want it to tell me. I will know. I know what my hair needs. And so these little small adjustments, becoming more selective around what it is exactly that you're looking for as a consumer, and not just taking the product off your shelf because it's speaking to you on the packaging, but really to look more in terms of its what we call the provenance and the traceability of a product. Where does this come from? What ingredients are in here? Is this actually suitable for me? And I think that's where it's a pity. In the old kind of days, you would have these hair and makeup experts inside Clicks or these retail stores. And you could go and have a conversation with them before, kind of debating or choosing which of these products. So we see those kinds of retail standards are not there. The product manufacturing standards are not there. And really, I would say that the consumer actually needs to take part of the responsibility for becoming more selective, and asking, probing more questions of the store itself so that they get their buying and their purchasing right for us.
Well, we've only got a few minutes left. I see that Dis-Chem actually came out the other day with an ad saying, if you have or are producing natural products, get in touch with us. We want to stock it. Do you think that's a more appropriate response? And just as a futurist also, sorry, I just wanted, as a futurist, there's a natural hair movement growing. I love what you're saying about being a more responsible consumer. Is this one of the ways that we could be? Buy local, buy natural?
Absolutely. And it's going to become the need for it. I would even say to Cape Town TV readers, go online. See how simple it is to actually make some of these products. It's actually not rocket science. I work in innovation and do product development and do prototyping. Yes, there are there are cleanliness standards and there's health and there's all sorts of issues, but there are some very interesting maker spaces that have popped up in and around the city where you can go and experiment in a lab and put together your own shampoo and conditioner. And this is a very exciting time because with post-COVID, we need to be doing more of what's called market creating innovation. In other words, importing less and trying to see how do we use our local natural resources and how do we combine that with certain recipes and values in order to be making small products, ranges that can be sold within our friends and family systems. And I think more and more people are kind of clicking onto that idea. And I would encourage your viewers as well.
Thank you, Merle. That's all we have time for. Thank you for joining us and for a fascinating conversation.
You're welcome, my darling. We'll chat later. Hey, go well. Bless you. Bye.
Welcome back. You're watching The Womxn Show, and that's all we had for the show this evening. But before we go, let's take a look at a celebration of natural hair. And that's all we have for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Lenina Rasool. Good night.